Today I'm continuing my look at the 2023 vintage Chardonnays from Kumeu River. The wine I'm looking at today is their Coddington Vineyard Chardonnay, so a single vineyard Chardonnay. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we, and see how they got on. Now, Kumeu River have really built a reputation for producing world-beating wines from this variety, and in fact they're single vineyard wines which have widely been seen as being of equivalent quality to the Premier and Grand Crus of Burgundy. Coddington is one of a trio of single vineyard wines, the others being Hunting Hill and Matty's Vineyard. Now, Coddington stands alone from the other two vineyards in that it's in Waimakere, while Hunting Hill and Matty's Vineyard are immediately opposite the winery in Kumeu. The 6 kilometres distance between Waimakere and Kumeu is about the same distance as that between Puligny-Montrachet and Meursault. And certainly Coddington has its own quite distinctive style. It stands out from the Hunting Hill and the Matty's almost as much as a Meursault would stand out from a Puligny-Montrachet. The Coddington vineyard was planted in 1994 by Tim and Angela Coddington. The vineyard is about 1.8 hectares in size, and it's on quite heavy clay soils over sandstone, and it's north facing, so it gets good sunlight and can consistently achieve quite high ripeness levels. The Coddingtons started selling their fruit to Kumeu River in 1998. And up until 2006, the fruit went into Kumeu River's estate-level Chardonnay. However, because of the standout nature of its richness, it was decided from 2006 onward to bottle this as a single vineyard wine. The Coddington family no longer own the vineyard. However, their team still manage the vineyards, and there's little difference in the viticultural practices in Coddington and those of Hunting Hill and Matty's. One difference is that the vines here are trained on what are called vertical shoot positioning, so there's just a single hedge of vines. The vineyards at Kumeu are actually trained onto what they call lyre trellising, giving 2 separate hedges of the same plant. Also, the Chardonnay planted at Coddington is different. The clone planted here is a clone originally developed by the University of California, and that's clone 15. It's a common clone in New Zealand and tends to give quite sort of broad, rich, generous styles of Chardonnay, whereas Matty's and Hunting Hill Vineyard, I believe, are planted at least partially with Mendoza clone Chardonnay, which tends to give quite good fresh acidity. 2023 was a very challenging vintage in the vineyard. There was a wet winter and spring, and finally there was some relief with warm, dry weather around Christmas. However, even in the first couple of weeks of January, it rained again. Now, this wasn't too troublesome because actually flowering and fruit set had been good, and the rain at this stage came before the stage that's called veraison, where the grapes will sort of soften and start to colour. So an excess of water doesn't do too much damage to the grapes at that stage. However, the period at the end of January, there were some really quite heavy downpours, most particularly on the 27th of January when a cyclone hit, and Kumeu received over 10 inches of rain in a period of less than 12 hours. This saw some minor flooding in the winery, and a portion of Matty's vineyard was flooded. Personally, I was trying to drive home through Kumeu that night, and actually I got about as far as where Coddington Vineyard is on State Highway 16, having taken some diversions, and there the road was simply a lake, so I had to turn around. I didn't get home that night. It was a serious weather incident. However, it wasn't really this volume of water that was the problem. The problem was subsequently that downy mildew took hold. The vines had previously been sprayed against downy mildew, but the intensity of the rain had washed those sprays from the vine leaves. There was no way of getting back into the sort of saturated, waterlogged vineyards to do more spraying. So what actually happened was some quite severe defoliation. Coddington was one of the more seriously affected vineyards, and with no leaves left on the vine, there was no way to complete the ripening process. There was quite a lot of good, healthy fruit on the vines, but no way to continue with ripening. So that forced an early picking. Harvest was done entirely by hand, and there was some very careful selection went on, which obviously reduced yields significantly. But they made sure that absolutely only healthy fruit made its way into the presses. Fruit was whole bunch pressed. The notes I've got don't actually say that, but that is the normal practice here, I believe. And the juice was allowed to go into barrel with a fair amount of solids, a fair amount of turbidity in there. And it was put directly into barrel, so each individual barrel would start fermenting with the indigenous microflora, the yeasts that had found their way in on the fruit or were already established in the winery. So each individual fermentation will have started slightly differently. What that is doing is creating a multitude of slightly different ferments, each of which have slightly different characters, and giving the winemakers loads of blending options. This barrel fermentation will have taken place in 228 litre French oak barriques. Now in 2023 they opted to use no new oak because they felt that the slightly less ripe, slightly less rich fruit probably wouldn't take the intense flavours. Normally there's about 25% of new oak barrels used in fermentation for Coddington. However, because the harvest was quite small, there was a larger proportion of first and second year oak. So they feel that did quite a lot to compensate in terms of giving oak notes to the wine. The wine stayed in barrel for 11 months, during which period it will have undergone malolactic conversion. It was left there with its yeast lees in place, so sort of feeding it, giving it richness, helping to protect it against oxidation. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we, and see how they got on. So first of all, the colour. Looking at it, it has a relatively pale yellowish colour. It might just be a tiny green hint to the colour. It has a relatively pale yellow colour. The wine's label says it has 12.6% alcohol, so relatively low alcohol for a New World Chardonnay, and certainly for this wine, and so it's not particularly viscous. The aromas are fairly restrained, but have a lovely complexity, and there's a good intensity and seeming ripeness. Initially I can see creamy notes, and then taking over from that, there's a quite well defined peachy stone fruit note on the nose. And that's beautifully married to the creaminess that's there as well. So let's have a taste, shall we? The wine's bone dry, and there's a good mineral crispness. I was looking for a tartness, but actually there isn't. This is a really nicely defined, almost sort of metallic freshness. It seems really clean. It's leaving my mouth watering, and it's actually pushing the flavours up to the centre of my tongue, where there is this lovely, rich peachiness. There's a peaches and cream combination going on there. Behind that, there are just the slightest notes of vanilla. Barrel notes weren't particularly obvious on the nose. Here we start to see vanilla touches. Perhaps just a little bit of mealy richness towards the finish there, with a little bit of warmth and richness on the back palate that almost makes the alcohol seem a little higher than is noted. Everything's beautifully balanced, it's lovely and rounded. So despite the fact that this is coming from a lighter vintage, the wine doesn't seem thin or sharp. It manages to maintain its harmony right to the finish. And perhaps there, as it's developing in my mouth, I am seeing some tiny touches of toasty oak coming through. The wine's obvious freshness shows this is still a young wine. I think it's beautifully approachable now, and the fruit is open. I suspect given 3 or 4 years, that fruit will open and give a bit more of itself. I don't think this is ever going to be a huge, rich wine in the style that Coddington can be. I think there's an elegance, a concentration and a confidence to this wine, which is really very impressive. I was actually a little surprised to see that our aggregated critic score for this vintage of this wine was 92. Now that follows on the previous 4 vintages, which had been excellent, where the wines received an aggregated critic score of 93. I wondered if that was being a little bit generous for a wine from such a challenging year. But I think I have to say that the Brackoviches have really risen to the challenge of a very difficult vintage and made a lovely, concentrated, harmonious wine in a year where they've obviously had to work very hard. So yes, in the conditions, I think an outstanding wine. I'll leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so you can find out where it's available in your market, what its price is, and you can use the tabs on that page to find out more about the producer, the region, the grape variety, the winemaking, the different vintages, on its price history, critics and some of their scores, and you can see reviews from other users and any awards it's won as well. So hopefully that's giving you pretty much all the information you could ever want to make an informed decision about maybe buying this wine. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. If you'd like to watch more of our tasting videos, it would be fantastic if you'd consider subscribing to our channel. We'd really appreciate your support there. If you have any friends you think would like to watch the video, do please feel free to pass it on to them. We'd really appreciate your endorsement in that way. And come and watch another tasting video with us really soon. Bye for now.